was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. Today, I had the great pleasure of chatting with Spike Cohen. Spike and I discussed the Libertarian Party, libertarian messaging, lockdowns, and cancel culture. I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. Unfortunately, Boogie did not want to let us finish the podcast. He interrupted us about 50 some odd minutes in. So you get a pretty good conversation and then a pretty entertaining ending. But before we get into the podcast, go to where you listen to all your podcasts. Rate, review, 5 stars. 5 stars. If you would like to reach out to me, Tommy at libertarianinstitute.org. If you need any graphic design needs, go to ryanbunting.com. ryanbunting.com is where you get your graphic design done. Ryan is the gentleman who designed my logo and Pete's logo and also the cover for my upcoming book. And as always, thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy. All right, man. Well, I am here with Mr. Spike Cohen. How's it going, sir?
I'm doing great, Tommy. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful day to be out on the road. I wish I was fishing though. I think that's going to be my new intro theme. Everybody I'm going to bring on the show until it gets cold again. I'm going to just tell them, well, I should be fishing.
You'd rather be fishing than interviewing the person. That's
I would rather be fishing than doing pretty much anything. I'm not going to lie to you.
Listen, I'd rather be on the beach swimming in the water than doing anything. So I totally empathize with you. There were plenty of times this summer I'd be getting interviewed by someone and they're like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm inside and dry, but other than that, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
That's awesome. Well, hey, I saw your this tweet thread you'd put out this morning, and I thought that was a really good place to start. Would you mind
Sure.
running through that story for us?
Sure. So for those who don't know, in 2014, this actually today, 7 years ago today, I was told by a neurologist that I was in an emergency room because the right side of my body had gone numb. And I was told by a neurologist after doing MRIs and testing that it was likely that I had MS, multiple sclerosis. MS is something that they almost can never diagnose at that time. It usually takes months or years. It's what's called a differential diagnosis, which means they have to rule out a ton of other stuff before they finally zero in and say that it's MS. But I knew it was MS. I had the lesions in my brain and spine that are kind of the telltale signs of MS. I had the symptoms of MS. All of the tests that they had done initially came back negative for anything else that I could have potentially had. I knew it was just a matter of time, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. At that point, I had I was 6. How old was I in 2014? So 7 years from now. Man, you're making me do math. So at this point, I was 15 years into my business. I'd spent almost half of my life in business. I had, pretty successful company. I, had a good family. I was happy with my wife. And, I thought I had the bull by the horns and I was going to go and grow into the multi-billion-dollar business that I was working on growing it into. And then when you get told that you have an incurable, or at least as of yet incurable, neurodegenerative progressive disorder where your immune system's trying to eat your brain and your spine, it really just, it's as defeating as anything else. I would assume that it would be similar to being told that you had, stage 3 cancer or something like that, because this is something that doesn't go away. There are treatments that can kind of put it at bay, but it never actually goes away. And I was able to get steroid treatment and they brought the symptoms down and I kind of reached an equilibrium and stabilized for a couple of years, but I was never the same. And I was just kind of going through life broken. waiting in dread for the next shoe to drop. And sure enough, within a couple of years, I started having more symptoms, and I'd had more relapses. And in the end of 2016, I was finally told that I did for certain have MS. That was actually a good thing because it allowed me to now seek out treatments. Once you have the diagnosis, you can now get into the actual treatment. And so they sat me down, and this is actually the part that was more life-changing than the diagnosis itself, or at least a more positive change. I was told that the purpose of all the different MS treatments, they're called DMTs, disease modifying therapies. It's interesting that they're called DMT. If I remember on Rogan and he asked,
it took me a minute to figure out you weren't talking about taking DMT. I was like,
DMT, yeah.
Oh, I wish I could get prescribed DMT.
if I ever go on Rogan and he says, have you tried DMT? I'm like, I take DMT every single month. Anyway, so, they're telling me the course that the goal of the treatment is to slow down the progression of my MS to the point where it's not much different than just the typical aging process that we all go through. And that was supposed to make me feel better. That actually hit me like a ton of bricks, because I realized in that moment, we have a sense of permanence, right? We have this sense of, we know we're all going to die, but we really just try our best not to think about it. So it's this thing that's far, far away and it's never going to happen. And in the meantime, we can just do whatever we want. And so we get caught up in real petty stuff, consumerism, petty disagreements, shame about past things, stupid stuff that really doesn't matter, inconvenient, trivial things that happen throughout the day. We get caught up in a bunch of minutia stuff that really at the end of the day doesn't matter. And I realized in that moment, pick a time, 100 years, 200 years, whatever from now, none of us will be here. Our wealth won't matter. How much fun we had didn't matter. What disagreements we had didn't matter. The only thing that will matter is how much of a positive impact we were able to make on the lives of other people around us. How much were we able to help others? Did we do so much that we were able to create a ripple effect where others were inspired to also help others? Will the world be better off because we were here, or will it not even matter? And that completely retooled my way of thinking about life. In that moment, I realized everything I had been working on were things that eventually would not matter to me or to anyone else once I'm no longer here. And so I retired from my business, and I was at a point where I didn't really have to work for money, which allowed me to really focus on, well, what do I want to do? What do I want my legacy to be? And I realized that I had been a libertarian for many years at that point, but I realized that there were two things. Number one, I hadn't really spent the time on libertarian messaging and activism that I wanted to. It was more of a casual thing to me. And number two, I realized that where my mindset on libertarianism came from was all wrong. My libertarianism was focused on things that I hated, things that I raged against, things that outraged me. I was disgusted by the wars overseas. I was outraged by, the camps on the border. I was disgusted by and hateful of the prison industrial complex. The fact that you have poor people that are segregated into failing schools that they have no hope of getting out of, and they end up in prison. And all of these things filled me with hatred. And I was motivated by a rage. They talk about rage against the machine. I was doing it. I was raging, even though I was myself in a pretty comfortable lifestyle. Just seeing those things happening around me filled me with rage. And I realized something. My rage wasn't helping anyone. My outrage about it, my anger and my hatred of it was not helping a single person. And I realized in that moment, if for no other reason than the fact that I needed to change how I processed life. My body was not going to let me rage through life. It would kill me very early on if I continued to do that. And so I realized that I had it all wrong. My libertarianism is not going to be about what I hate. I'm not going to be outraged about an out of control government because I hate the people in power and I want bad things to happen to them and I want them out. I'm a libertarian because I want that harm to end. I want to free people from cages. I want to free people from criminal records for victimless crimes. I want to free people from not being able to defend themselves because of the war on guns. I want to free people from being bombed and abused overseas because of this failed war on terrorism. I want to end the spying on people. I want people to be freer and happier and healthier and safer and more prosperous than they have ever been before. And I want future generations, their children, and their children, to do better than we can even imagine right now. And so it really just retooled everything. And the purpose for that post was kind of threefold. Number one, I wanted people to know that, whatever's happening right now that seems insurmountable, everything passes eventually. This too will pass, and things do eventually get better. There may be some new thing to have to deal with, and I certainly can't guarantee that there won't be more challenges and fun stuff down the road, but whatever you're going through right now will pass. The next thing I want to tell you is that our activism and our legacy has to come from a place of making a positive impact on those around us, because that's something that is immortal. That is something that will survive long after we are gone, long after we're no longer here. The people that we were helped will help other people who will help other people, and create hopefully a culture of helping others. And then the last thing that I want to say in all of this is that the terrible things that happen could very well end up putting you on a path that is far better than anything you could have imagined before. That's certainly what happened to me. If someone had told that broken man in 2014 that, one day, a few years later, he'd be traveling around the country and doing interviews every day and spreading the message of liberty, I would have thought it was some kind of cynical joke. And here I am. And right. So that's the message behind what I posted. And it's really the message that I give every day, or try to give every day.
No, and when I read that, and the reason I wanted you to go through that, because I think liberty, the message of liberty is very important, and the way that we reach people. And I read it and I was like, this is what I liked about him. Like I knew, like when I saw you as vice presidential candidate, I was like, oh, I really like that guy. I was telling friends of mine that were fans of yours, like, I really like him. I'd never heard of you before, but I was like, I really like this guy. I can't place like what's different about him, but I really like him, and you have this like charisma about you. You have this spirit about you, but there's this hopefulness that you give off, which is really nice. It's really appealing, and people are drawn to that. You draw more flies with honey than you do with shit, so. Oh, maybe not.
It depends. You know what? It takes all kinds. There are some people that are drawn into, and that's why I say, when people will say, oh, well, this person on their podcast, they're angry and they're full of rage and and I'm like, you know what? They might be drawing people in with that. There are people that right now, they don't want to hear about hope. They want to hear about how angry they are about stuff. And that's fine. It takes all kinds. My activism and my messaging focuses on, this does not have to be this way. The catchphrase that I use is, you are the power. And what it means many different things. It means that this sham of a system that we live in, this con game, can't exist without you and the consent of you and others. And that's not blaming you for it. It's saying that when enough of us say, there's a picture that I see where it's a person standing on a plank that's out off a cliff, and he's up on a pedestal at the end of the plank, and he's ordering people around, and there's this whole crowd in front of him that he's ordering around, and they're standing on the plank that holds him up. So the minute they walk away, he's going to fall off into the cliff. And you notice there are some people on the edges that are looking at the plank and they just start walking away like, wait a second, we don't have to do this. And so that's part of the message, is that, we have the power to fix these things working together. We have the power to topple all of these people and to kick them out of office and to dismantle the power structures they built and put the power and the freedom and the money back in the hands of the people where it always damn well belonged. But the other part of saying you are the power is that you are more powerful than anyone will probably let you know. There are incredible things that you are able to do. And all it takes is giving up on the things that we are told that matter. The things that we focus so much of our life on waste probably 80, 90%. Even now, I still get caught up in dumb stuff, and I have to take steps back and say, wait a second, none of this matters. It's not going to matter 3 days from now, much less, 3 years from now or 3 decades from now. And when you do that, when you free yourself of the things that truly don't matter and focus on what does matter and focus on what actually is important, being kind to others, helping others, telling others that they don't have to live this way, spreading a message of freedom in a cheerful way, we can do incredible things.
Right. And, I really appreciate, and like I said, it's really appealing the way that you approach that. And I do try to stay on the more positive side, but I do rage against the machine quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
When I remember the coups in Venezuela, when they were trying to overthrow the Maduro government in Venezuela. Right. And I came out with a podcast and I was raging against libertarians that were cheering them on because socialism. Right. And I was just like, this is ridiculous, man. It doesn't matter what the government over there is. What our government is doing is wrong. And you can't, and it really angered me to see libertarians saying, oh, well, it's okay because socialism, and just kind of giving it a pass. And I was really angry about that. And I went off for probably 45 minutes. I was cussing and ranting and raving. I was just like, this is insanity. We don't need that, you know? But at the same time, I look at your message and I look at the libertarian infighting, and that's been something that's really like pushed me away from the Libertarian Party. Like I involved myself in the Libertarian Party for the first time 3 years ago. And then I was just like, I looked at what was happening and I was like, I just wasted $25 like to join this party. And then I got the renewal a year later, and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to renew. And I was like, 6 months later, I wasted another $25. What the hell? Yeah. And this happened again last year. I felt the same way. And so now this year, I'm like, I don't even know if I want part of this. I don't even know if it's worth it. I'll just keep podcasting, trying to spread the message of liberty, having good conversations, trying to attract people in that way, because I don't do this for popularity or fame or whatever. I do this because I'm trying to draw as much attention to this message so that my kids who are just entering adulthood right now, I have a granddaughter that's a year old, they experience some sort of liberty in their lifetime, because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to see it.
Exactly. And here's the thing I want to say, Tommy, and I say this as a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party, someone who every weekend, next weekend, I'll be in Oklahoma, tomorrow I'll be in Oklahoma City. Last weekend, I was in Huntsville, Alabama for their convention. The week before, I was in Atlanta. Pretty much every weekend, I'm going to be at some Libertarian Party event, of a state level party event, or even national party event, pretty much between now and the end of the year, with hopefully a couple breaks in there. Actually, I'd like to go somewhere else. But, as someone who is very hyper involved in the Libertarian Party and trying to right that ship, I need people to know that the Libertarian Party is not libertarianism is not the exclusive property of the Libertarian Party. The liberty movement, the Libertarian Party, is one part of the liberty movement. And if someone is there and they feel as though, and I'm not discouraging people from joining or from renewing or anything else. I hope you stick around, because I need everyone's help that I can get to help turn this ship and get some incredible things done. But if you feel as though your time and effort and money that in the party is being wasted, and if you see another more viable alternative in terms of libertarian activism or direct action or mutual aid or podcasting or libertarian meetups or pushing for certain legislation in your area or whatever, then do that. This, at no point should someone feel shamed, guilted, or obligated to be a part of the Libertarian Party because it's got the word libertarian next to it. If you feel that this is a viable vehicle to put your time, money, and resources into and efforts into to help push the message of liberty, then come aboard, and we can't wait to work with you. But it is not, this is not the be-all, end-all of liberty. The libertarianism existed long before the Libertarian Party, and hopefully when we accomplish our goals and set people free and don't need a Libertarian Party, libertarianism will continue to exist and flourish long after it.
Right. Yeah. And that would be great. That would be great. And I look at what's going on with like Dave Smith and Reed Coverdale and these guys in the libertarian unity message. And I'm like, okay, like I see what you're doing. But then you still get the same old cancer popping up. It's like, well, I was like, when is this cancer like going to just like disintegrate? When will the tumor that is these people that want to throw around the name calling and the wokeness or whatever they're doing? I can't even like figure out what they're doing, what their goals are, other than to be part of some big club. So it's like, we want to be the most elite people in this tiny little club. And it's like, we want to be the
biggest fish in this increasingly deteriorating pond that
in the goldfish bowl.
In the goldfish bowl. And the thing is, so let me just throw some number. Well, first I'm going to say this. There are some people in the Libertarian Party, and it's individual people. This is not that there's an entire group of people, but there are some within the party and even a couple within what I would call leadership or prominence within the party that would rather the party be smaller if it meant that the kind of people they disagree with left. Now, let me put in perspective how terrible that is, Tommy. In order to, and this is some very rough back of the book math, so don't expect me to pull out charts and graphs. This is just some rough numbers. In order for us to be able to win, because right now we're at the party membership and size and resources are at the ability to be able to get on all 50 state ballots. And in terms of winning elections, we're able to win at least a couple dozen to a couple hundred elections at the local level, maybe one or two state legislative races. But we're at the real basic bottom level of having any kind of electoral success, which is really, I mean, we're the only third party that has that right now. But in order for us to be able to have any kind of success at the federal level or the statewide level, in order for us to win even a single congressional race or a single, gubernatorial race or secretary of state race, and to win many more local elections, we need to be roughly 10 times bigger and 10 times, more funded, and just all around 10 times larger in every measure, in every metric than we are now. In order to seriously contend presidential elections and be able to have a hope of getting a majority or even a large number of people in the Senate, and to get a majority in the House, and to be like one of the major 2 or 3 parties out there, we have to grow to 50 to 100 times our current size. The fact that there are people who are in positions of leadership within the party, and I'm not even going to name names because it's not a name thing. This is a mindset, not individuals. This is not about a specific person, and when we get rid of that person, it'll all be gone. This is a mindset. There are those with the mindset that it would be better for us to be even smaller, even less able to do what the purpose of the Libertarian Party is, which is to contest and win elections. That's the purpose of a political party. And they would rather us be even less able to do that, and even less involved in the national conversation, if it meant that people that they disagree with aren't a part of the party. And when you consider the fact that if you take the people on the outside fringes of the party, and more than likely, if you just gave them a series of yes or no answers on different policies, they would probably agree like 85% of the time, if not more. Now, that 15% is still important, and it's still important to have that discussion and debate. But the fact that you would allow 15% or 10% or whatever it is to refuse to work with people, and this is happening on all sides here, refusing to work with people or wanting to push out people when we desperately need to be bringing in many, many more people, getting people on fire, setting a fire for liberty, and getting people excited to come here in droves and become a part of the liberty movement. It just seems so incredibly counterintuitive and unfortunate to me.
Yeah, it absolutely, especially after the last year of lockdowns and all that. And
Yes.
you look at these people, and they're worried about, just some of the most obscure stuff. And you're looking at it, you're like, what are you even talking about? You have a totalitarian government that's locking people in their homes. They're perfectly happy with 12-year-olds committing suicide. Like they're not doing, and you're focused completely on the wrong thing. Like, how do you expect for people like me, the working class guy that's looking at what's happening to my friends and my family, around the country, and I'm like, how do you expect me to relate to you? Like, what are you saying? What message are you delivering other than saying, oh, you're not pure enough? Okay, like, I'm sorry, I may not be pure enough, but I'm fighting a battle against this totalitarian state, and telling people they don't have to put up with getting locked in their homes, basically,
Right.
Locked in solitary confinement for a year, and the only time you can go out is when you have a mask over your face. I mean, come on, man. Like, this is insane. Why are we having these ridiculously, like, obscure, absurd battles over, you said a no-no word, or you talked to a no-no person, or you did a no-no thing 15 years ago? It's like, all right, whatever, man.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. There's 2 different things there. One was the lack of good messaging coming from national. Some of that is just the fact that they don't have a communications department. My understanding is that they're working on creating one now, but it's really an ad hoc system of, well, who do you think we should post that, and then or tweet that, and then they vote on it. And so there's like it's sort of like messaging by committee, instead of putting someone in charge and saying, here, we trust you to spread the libertarian message as the party, we'll rein you in if we think that something is too far out there, but for the most part, go out there and give the liberty message. They won't do that, or they haven't yet. Hopefully that is what they're going to do. But as a result, there's sort of this weird hodgepodge of messaging that's often or sometimes counterintuitive counterintuitive or contradictory. It's interesting that in the last year, the most swift condemnation that came from the Libertarian Party was of the Capitol Hill riots. Now, I want to say something. I don't support the Capitol Hill riots. I don't think that they were fighting for freedom. They were fighting because they didn't like the election outcome, and they were trying to, they thought that they were going to, reinstall Trump. They had no real plan to do so. They just kind of showed up and then walked around and took pictures because they had no clue what they were doing. There was nothing good that came from that, and it gave government an excuse now to lock down the Capitol Hill and push for domestic extremism restrictions and all of this stuff. So it was bad all the way around. But the fact that after a year of the government telling almost the entire population whether or not they were essential, and watching the massive amounts of harm that was done as a result of the lockdowns, which we now have the benefit of the data showing us did nothing to slow the spread of COVID in the states where it was implemented. And we knew that that was going to happen because the World Health Organization was saying from the beginning, lockdowns are a short-term temporary thing to give hospitals time to get situated. You cannot do them long-term. They will do far more harm than good, and they won't slow the spread of the virus. We already knew that, and they did it anyway. After a year of that, the fact that the strongest condemnation that came out was attack on a government building, which again, I don't support. It was good that we said something about it. I'm not saying any of that. But the fact that that was the strongest thing, the fact that there was an almost total absence of any real messaging speaking out against these ridiculous lockdowns, which is one of the greatest at-large infringements on the lives of everyday Americans that we've seen, certainly in our times. Just because of how widespread it was. I mean, there's certainly times when individuals and groups have been harmed greater than these lockdowns did, but never was the whole country like this, not in our times anyway. Right. And the fact that there was almost nothing that came out of that, it just shows a problem with messaging. I want to talk now about the cancel culture thing. Mm-hmm. I think that I think it's good when people hold people accountable for bad actions in the now or things that they haven't atoned for or whatever else, and not canceling and ruining them or whatever. But I think it's good. Like when we say why, a government shouldn't stop people from discriminating, but how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with that by saying, hey, these people are racist or bigots and we don't want to do business with them. Mm-hmm. That's different from what's happening with cancel culture now. Like you said, they're going after things that people said 5, 10, 15 years ago. I remember there was a kid that he's like 20 something, and he got hired by Michelob or Budweiser, one of the beer companies, because he was holding up a sign at one of the football games, and he became a sponsor, and they gave him some money, and he was on their social media. And someone dug up a tweet he did from like 2009 or 2010 when he was in middle school, and he said like the N-word, or he said some racist thing or some whatever, and he was a kid, and he immediately apologized for it and said, I'm so sorry that I did that. And they still wanted him canceled. There was no redemption. When you have a movement or a cultural phenomena that is based on the idea of destroying the livelihood and reputation of someone who did something at any point in their life, and that there's no chance for redemption. You simply have to say, oh, I did this thing. I am now untouchable for the rest of my life. I still have to prostrate myself before everyone and say how terrible I am, knowing full well that everyone's still going to call me a scumbag for the rest of my life. I'm going to go sit in the corner now and wait to die. This is a bad thing. And especially when you consider that the standards continue to tighten and tighten and tighten, and they go back retroactively. So there are plenty of people now we're seeing who are just as woke and social justice friendly as the next person. And they're being canceled for stuff they said 5, 6 years ago that was either fine or no one really cared about it. But now it's, it's phobic or it's bigoted or it's whatever. And, I don't think that it's bad to find, unironic racists and Nazis and say, hey, this person's a racist or a Nazi. I don't think we should, deal with them and I think that they're bad or whatever. But that's different than what's happening now. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And it just goes to show when people have power, they often abuse it. And cancel culture has become a powerful thing. And as with any other powerful tool, it's often being abused. And it's an issue. I do think we're going to reach an equilibrium where at some point people are going to go, wait, isn't everyone canceled now? So if we're all canceled, then I guess none of us are canceled. Right. And it may take that. It may take every single person realizing how terrible they are and how they can't meet their own standards. I think that's a weird cultural phenomenon. And I tend to think, if you look at things like witch hunts, the Spanish Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, these are things, they reach a critical mass, and then they eventually, go away when people realize how absurd they were. And I think that's where we're headed with this.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should be judged solely on the worst act they've ever or word they've ever said in their life. In the
past. Yeah.
Like 15 years ago, I did something really stupid, and now for the rest of my life, that's what I am. I am that, and it's like,
if there had been a Twitter when I was in high school, I mean, think about anyone watching this or listening to this, think about the things that you used to say. If you're in your 30s, 40s, I'm 39,
I'm 41
this year. Okay, you're our age, you're mine and Tommy's age. Okay, you're in your 30s, your 40s, whatever. Think about the stuff you used to say in high school. Think about the stuff you used to say in college. Now imagine if there was a permanent record of this on social media that anyone could pull from and go, oh my gosh, look at what this person said, 20 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever. And then you get your life now is ruined. I'm seeing where they're going after like jokes that David Letterman said in the 90s. And I thank God that there was no social media when I was in high school, because I'd absolutely be canceled. I was a high schooler. I wasn't a bad person, and I wasn't a racist, and I never hurt anyone. But the things that high schoolers say, they're now saying for everyone to see. They're now saying it on videos. And 10, 15 years from now, when they know far better for their actions, they are now held to that standard, that day's standard of what they said back then. And even in the context of them being a kid when they did it, and there's no way for them to apologize or atone for it. It's absurd.
Yeah, it was at the new editor of Teen Vogue I guess she got fired or was forced to resign because of a tweet she had posted when she was 17.
Yeah.
And that was like 10 years ago. She's 27 years old now. It's like, come on, man. I mean, I don't read Teen Vogue, obviously, but, but I don't like why are you trying to ruin people's lives for things they said when they were teenagers? I mean, it should, I don't know, man, put a timeline on this time limit on this stuff, and it like automatically deletes and you never can find it again or something, or
even let them atone for it. Like, I don't know which, I heard it was Teen Vogue and she said something that was racist. I didn't see what it was, but let's say it was terrible. Let's say it was a really bad thing she said when she was 17. I don't know, that she said slavery was good or something, whatever. Let's like it's a thing that we all universally can agree is bad and racist. Right. Okay. Let her apologize for it. Yeah. Let her say, hey, I was a kid. I was dumb. I don't agree with that now, or I was whatever, but I'm very sorry. I recognize how much it hurt people, and I'm so sorry it happened. Okay, well, absent any other proof that you're still a bad, horrible person, or that you even were back then I think we can let you relive your life. But the problem is people aren't seeking justice. They're seeking, it's not even retribution. They're seeking like vengeance. They're seeking punitive. They're seeking to punish people. And with no, it's not about, it's interesting. They're doing what the Bureau of Prisons does. They're focusing on punishment over correction. Like instead of the person learning from it and being able to move ahead, everyone has to say, I was a terrible person. I'm so sorry I did this. What a bad person I am. And then at least then they kind of leave you alone, but then you're still ruined for the rest of your life. And it's a major problem. And like I said, if it continues this way, Tommy, eventually everyone's going to be found wanting. And they'll learn that when you have a religion that's based on original sin and there's no redemption, everyone goes to hell.
Well, luckily for me, I drive a truck for a living, so I would probably get fired if I hadn't said anything offensive in the past. That's always a bonus, but
it's a perk.
Yeah. Well, let's move into some actual policy stuff that we see going on around us. We got this whole push for gun control. We've had two mass shootings in the last couple of weeks, I guess the last week. And now there's this entire push for gun control. Yep. And I'm of the opinion, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm of the opinion, no matter what laws these people have passed, and I'm kind of taking this from upstate New York's reaction to them attempting to ban AR-15s up there years ago. Yep. No matter what laws they pass, nobody's going to follow these laws, or no self-respecting gun owner is going to follow these laws one way or the other. And number two, it's too little too late with the 3D printing industry.
And that's a big part of this, is that you can't, as they say, you can't stop the signal. At this point, an internet connection and a 3D printer, we are slowly reaching a point, and not just on gun control, but on many things. We are slowly reaching a point, thanks to the blockchain, thanks to encryption, and thanks to 3D manufacturing. We're reaching a point where the wars on things will cease to exist in any real way. They'll be essentially unenforceable when you can, because we're just at the beginning of this technology. If you think where, even phone technology has come in the last 20 years, 20 years from now, you'll be able to, take a file of something, buy a little bit of, some kind of material for building in like a bag, like kind of similar to how, it probably come in like a cartridge, like how ink does. And then you print it out. Now you got a freaking, 80% lower. There's really no way to effectively stop it long term. And by the way, I think the blockchain in general is going to be making government obsolete over the next generation or so. And really, we're just doing harm reduction in the meantime. But that's a whole other subject. When it comes to gun control, let's be very clear about something. The only people that are going to obey gun control orders are the absolute last people who you have to worry about ever hurting anyone with a gun. Not only are they law abiding, but they're also on the more meek or compliant side, or they just have so much to lose that even if they aren't meek themselves, they just don't want to risk it for their families and their livelihood. These are the last people that are going to hurt anyone. These are not the people that are going to carry out mass shootings. These are not the people that are going to hurt other people. There are hundreds of millions of guns in this country. It is impossible, even if we wanted to, it isn't, which we don't, but even if we wanted to, it is impossible to put the genie back in the bottle at this point. Pandora's box is wide open and ripped to shreds. There are guns everywhere. And if you restrict the ability of law-abiding and compliant people from being able to defend themselves, all you're doing is creating more fish in a barrel zones. You're creating more areas where mass shootings can happen. Here is a comprehensive list of all the mass shootings that have happened at gun rights rallies or gun shows or NRA meetings or GOA. I hate the NRA, but GOA meetings or whatever. Any group of a large group of armed people, police departments, any places where there are large groups of people who are heavily armed, there's never been a mass shooting. The mass shootings that happen since the Kent State shooting, every single major shooting, and they call mass shootings anything where 4 or more people are killed. If you go where, let's increase that to like 10. Any shooting where there's been at least 10 people killed, it has always been in a place where either the government didn't allow guns to be there, or that establishment or the owners of that property didn't allow guns to be there. Let me tell you the story of 2 different church shootings. The first one happened right here in South Carolina, where I live. A guy named Dylan Roof went into Mother Emanuel Church. He walked in. He actually worshiped with the people there. And then he pulled out a gun and casually murdered like 11 of them and walked out and drove away and got some Burger King on the way home. The reason he did that was because he was a racist and he was hoping to spark a race war. The reason he was able to do that was because Mother Emanuel Church didn't allow guns there, which meant he knew going in that he was going to be the only person there with the ability to be able to use a gun, which meant he could just casually pop people off as while they run and hide and scream and try not to get killed. Here's another attempted shooting that happened in, I forget where it was, something Spring or Lake, Texas, but it was a shooting that happened in Texas a year or so ago. A guy walked into a church that did allow people to have guns, and there were actually some people there who were armed, whose job it was to be on the lookout. He went in, he was able to shoot one person. I think that one person survived. That one person may have died, but I believe they survived. And 2 or 3 other people pulled out their guns and shot him, and he was dead. Gun control is the difference between a mass shooting and someone getting mass shot back at. Mm-hmm. We want that. We want people to get mass shot back at. I want the bullet, as I say to gun control advocates, you want the bullets to be flying in just one direction. I want them to be flying in both directions, which stops it from happening at all. Because also, most of these people, now some mass shooters, they're fine with dying, but some of them don't want to die. They want to do it and then be able to, tell people why they did it or whatever. A lot of the mass shooters that are out there are still alive. They were taken alive. They didn't want to die. Mm-hmm. So if you create that deterrent, if you make it where people know that anywhere they go, they're not going to be able to just go out and casually kill a bunch of people. Someone's going to shoot back. The likelihood of a shooting happening in the first place goes down exponentially. And we have all the data showing that the areas that have the most gun crime and murder in general, not just gun murders, but murders in general, are also the areas that have the most gun control. And the areas that have the least gun control are also the ones that have the least amount of murders, including gun murders. So all of the data is on the side of the pro-gun argument. And the final thing I want to say about this is that gun control doesn't stop people from getting guns. It stops people who aren't rich from getting guns. The higher that burden, that cost of barrier of entry that you create, the licensing and the fees and the tax stamps and everything else, you make it where only the wealthiest and most well-to-do people are able to defend themselves. And these are people that can hire security if they wanted to. You're making it where the people who need the ability to defend themselves the most are the least able to do so. Gun control is the gentrification of gun ownership. It ensures that only the haves are able to defend themselves and the have-nots have to rely on a government that has demonstrated that they are completely apathetic to their safety.
And those of the have-nots that want to commit violent acts against other people are going to find methods of doing that. With or without guns, it's gonna happen. I mean, you look at, and this is, you know, the argument always is, look at the places with the most gun control, the places where it's hardest to buy a gun, like Chicago. There's still a lot of gun violence there. Like, where are the guns coming from? You know, like, you know, and I know they argue, well, they bring them over the border from Indiana. Well, okay, but they're illegally doing that. Right. You know, they don't give a shit about your fucking law, man. Nobody cares. You know, and again, like, you look at upstate New York, they just ignored that law saying that you had to turn in your AR-15. Eventually they took that law off the books because I think they had it somewhere around, had figured that was somewhere around 3,000 AR-15s in that area. And I think like 3 were turned in or something like that. I mean, it's like, nobody's going to comply with this. So which
speaks to the fact, Tommy, that government power is actually not a real thing. Government power is illusory. It's 2 things. What are they willing to enforce against us with violence? But more importantly, what are we willing to tolerate? Everyone you know, including you and everyone watching this, speeds. We all go a few miles over the speed limit here and there. Sometimes we go with the speed limit, sometimes we don't. We actually get angry at the fact that there are people who get in the left lane and go only a few miles over the speed limit. We're like, get out of the left lane. This lane's for crime. Like, we're all talking about this. The police themselves have kind of this standard where, unless they're trying to give someone a hard time, for the most part, you're going 5 miles, even maybe 10 miles over, they're probably going to leave you alone. If you start going over that or you're driving recklessly, now they're going to bother you. There's a reason for that. They know they can't possibly enforce that speed limit. And so they just don't, because they'd rather pick a hill that they can actually fight on. And, you know, when we refuse, when we simply, and people in New York were telling me about this, that, you know, when the lockdowns were first introduced, there wasn't a single car on the road. And then over time, you saw more and more people that were getting out. Now, some of that was people that weren't scared anymore of the virus and were realizing they could still do things that they were allowed to. But a lot of it was people doing stuff they weren't necessarily allowed to. Right. And if even 5 or 10% of the population refuses to obey a rule, it becomes functionally impossible for them to enforce it. I want to say one more thing about the whole gun safety thing, because it's one thing for us to argue about the right to own guns, because very clearly we have a right to own guns. The purpose of gun ownership is not hunting. It's not even safety. It is keep maintaining a power balance between the haves and the have-nots, between the people in positions of power and the rest of us. It is about making sure that politicians remember that they are warm bodies that can catch lead like anyone else, not threatening them with it, not, you know, anything else. But a government that fears its people is a lot more humble and a lot less infringing and a lot less abusive to the people. But to a lot of people, their concern is safety. Well, if you have these guns, there's going to be more murder. Well, we know that there's 2 main, I guess, superpowers that are similar in demographics, population distribution, seasonality, and so forth. And that's the United States and the entire EU, not just cherry-picked countries in Scandinavia or Western Europe, but the entirety of the EU. The murder rate in the EU is something like, I think 3.8 per 100,000. And the murder rate in the US is something like 4.1 per 100,000. It's negligible difference. They're basically the same. We have the same murder rate. Now, the difference is their murders are done primarily, very few gun murders. They just have more other types of murders to offset it. Here, we have more gun murders, even though the majority of murders happen not with a gun or not with a rifle. There's still more gun murders because that's a tool that's more readily available here. But it doesn't reduce the amount of murder by any real way. If someone wants to commit murder, if someone has reached a point where they say, I want this person's life to end, and I don't even care if I get in trouble or go to jail or whatever else, this person has to die. They don't care if they have a gun or not. The gun might make it easier, but it doesn't make it less likely to happen. And we see that. If that were the case, then the overall murder rate in the EU would be much lower. And no, you can't cherry pick some, highly affluent country like Monaco or pick Japan, which in general has a much lower crime rate because of their culture of politeness. You can't cherry pick these countries because I can just as easily turn around and cherry pick a country like Venezuela or Tunisia or Egypt or something like that.
Right.
So if you want to take comparable countries or comparable major population centers, the EU and the US murder rates are almost identical.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that people fail to look at the fact that there's something truly wrong with the culture. Whenever there was a time not so long ago that kids used to go to a gun class in public school.
In school, yeah.
When I was in high school, people still drove around in pickup trucks with gun racks in their windows. So it's like, no, this isn't about the guns, man. Like, there's something else happening here. And when you have a country that is engaged in perpetual war, you have the perpetual inflation of the dollar and the American dream completely depleting year by year by year by year. You're coming up on the first generation of children who are likely to not do as well as their parents in the history of the United States. There's an issue with what's going on, and it's not because of the guns. It's because of the way the government handles its policy decisions and the environment that its fiscal and war policy has created for all of us. They talk about suicide rates in the US. Well, quit sending soldiers over to die. They quit making them see all these horrible stuff overseas for what? To line the pockets of some politicians and some multinational corporations. Like, let's stop that. Let's stop inflating the dollar to the point where companies are forced to move overseas to other countries because they can't afford to pay the labor here, and quit jacking up the minimum wage laws. Let's stop doing that. Let's quit creating the atmosphere for depression if you want to stop suicide. And that's what bothers me is nobody wants to talk about the root of all these issues. They just want to talk about, whether there's gun crime. Okay, yeah, where did it come from? How did it appear?
Gun control is very, very heavy in Latin America, and they have some of the highest rates of gun crime. Do you know why? Because the U.S. government's gun control or war on drug policy has empowered cartels both indirectly by creating a black market and directly through CIA and other intelligence agency direct support for specific cherry pick cartels that they use to fight against the cartels they don't like. And they've created this gun violence. Right. You can't get away from violence by saying most people can't own this tool. Only the rich and people who don't care about laws can have this tool. That doesn't change anything. It actually makes it worse. When we look at as I was saying before, when they tell us there are all these mass shootings that happen every single week, every single month, they count as, I think, either 3 or 4 or more dead in a shooting. The vast majority of those shootings are gang-related violence because of the war on drugs.
Right.
We saw a similar thing happened during the war on alcohol, during the prohibition of alcohol in the 1919 or 1920, when they passed the 18th Amendment prohibiting alcohol sales. Immediately, you saw cartels spring up. Two-bit thugs that used to do protection rackets and running numbers and stuff for bit money were suddenly becoming millionaires and even billionaires. Some of the first billionaires in this country were, people that were making money from the alcohol trade illegally. People like Al Capone, people like Joe Kennedy, people that were making a freaking fortune and engaging in campaigns of mass murder around the country to protect their turf. Months after they end the war on alcohol, your dog is beautiful, by the way.
Well, thank you, Boogie.
Boogie, he is beautiful.
Yeah.
I love Boogie.
He's just licking the hell out of me. I'm like, stop, dude, stop.
No, he's good. Boogie's good. Boogie can do no wrong. But when we ended the war on alcohol, when we ended prohibition, within a matter of months, those gangs fell apart. They started fighting each other because they didn't have any money anymore. They had to, the few ones that were able to stay around had to find the new drug trades like heroin and cocaine, or they had to get into gambling. And many of them had to go legit and just stop doing it. Joe Kennedy ended up getting into politics, and his kids ended up, the Kennedy dynasty. When we end the war on drugs, we end almost all of this crime, because now instead of, street gangs fighting on the street for turf, now it's something that can be bought on Amazon or bought in a store. And no, I don't want people buying heroin, but they're going to buy heroin. And frankly, a lot of them wouldn't be buying heroin if they could use cannabis as a pain relief alternative, but they can't. So they get addicted to opioids, which are illegal. And then when they get their FDA limit on how many opioids they can have, they turn to either buying opioids from someone else or the much cheaper option, which is black tar heroin, street drugs. The war on drugs has created this problem, including the 90+% of the gun violence problem.
Right. No, absolutely. You're absolutely correct about that. And it's so frustrating when you look at, a country like Portugal who decriminalized all drugs, and the way that it turned around for them. And you present this evidence to people, and they're just like, well, that's a different country. And I'm like, what are you trying to say, that the Portuguese are better people than the American citizens? Is that what? Yeah. Are they just they have a better nature about themselves? They're more reasonable than U.S. citizens. That's what you're saying? I just don't understand where your argument is. Like it's a different country.
Portugal's situation it's hard unless you live in an area that is being acutely affected by the opioid crisis. The whole country was like that. Their overdose rates, I forget the exact numbers, but they were through the roof. We've never seen anything comparable here to what Portugal was suffering from. Their crime, they used to be a very safe and docile country, and they were becoming increasingly crime-ridden. And they were using these very strong anti-drug policies to try to crack down, and it was just making it worse and worse and worse. It was, as they would crack down more, the black market was strengthened, the crime got worse, the addictions got worse, the overdoses got worse, everything got worse. And then eventually, it was so bad that it actually forced them to take a step back and go, wow, maybe we're doing this the exact opposite way that we should. Maybe we should be listening to these, drug decriminalization advocates. And so they did. And there has been a complete, like you said, it's a complete turnaround. They now have some of the lowest rates of overdose and addiction in Europe. They now have some of the lowest rates of crime in Europe. And it was because instead of treating addicts like criminals, they treated addicts like people who needed help. They treated them like patients. Now, I'm a libertarian. I don't support government programs or anything like that. I will say this: if I have to choose between spending this much money to get people help and making the problem better so they can get back on their own 2 feet, or spending this much money to throw them in a cage and turn them into a criminal because they have to get hard just to stay alive in there and to survive, and creating a black market and creating much more harm, I will take this option, every single day of the week. And the reality is, over time, things have gotten increasingly better there. And they haven't even fully legalized it. All they did was said, they legalized some things, but for other things, they said, okay, you still can't have this, but if we find you with it, we're not going to fine you or punish you or anything else. We're going to take it from you, but then we're also going to offer you help. And just that little mild change still keeping it illegal, which again, I support full legalization, but, or full, decriminal, whatever you want to call it, but where people can put what they want in their bodies because it's none of anyone else's business. And there is still somewhat of a black market in Portugal because there are things that are still not allowed. So they could do even better. But by simply not punishing the user, and by simply not punishing people for possessing it, and instead just taking it from them, and if they have an addiction, offering them some help, that drastically turned things around. If we did just that here, even not fully ending the war on drugs, but just softening it just a little bit, we'd see so much less violence, so much less addiction, so much less overdose. Things would be so much better.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I look at, like, they're attempting to try this in Oregon, and I'm hoping that, you know, that the federal government doesn't step in like Obama did with the marijuana and try to change their mind for them, so to speak.
I hope not.
You know, so that, you know, because that's just that much worse, you know, the centralization. And goodness, Boogie. He's just he's a monster.
I love him. I love him. Let him do what he wants. Let Boogie do what this is Boogie's show now. So when I had a dog before he passed away, he used to sit at my feet during some of my podcasts because I'd close this door to the room, but he figured out how to open it. So he'd literally open it and come in and lay at my feet. And that was usually fine. But then sometimes he'd be hungry or want to go out and he'd start groaning. And so I'm trying to interview someone or do an interview and you hear, like that. It's because he's right there by the mic and it's like, shut up. So no, I totally empathize with you, but no, Boogie can do no wrong.
Usually it's either him barking or his squeaky toy. He's usually running around with a squeaky toy, like squeaking it in my ear while I'm trying to interview. But we've been going for an hour anyway. So you have any?
That's what he's telling you. He's saying it's time to wrap it up.
He's hot too. He's hot too, because if I have this truck running while I'm trying to interview, it's distracting.
Oh,
it makes all kinds of noise.
So no, you gotta take care of Boogie, man.
Yeah. So you have anything you want to plug before we get off here?
Yeah, so I just want to say, like I said, again, I think the most important thing is that we need to focus when we're doing messaging, when we're talking to people about libertarianism, when we're talking to people about the message of liberty, we need to focus on two things. Number one, most people don't care about natural rights because they don't know they're supposed to care. They care about how something will benefit or hurt them. So we need, even though we're not consequentialists, even though we aren't libertarians because it works, we're libertarians because it's right. We need to be able to message to people to explain how it works because it does work. And you know, if we know that it works, then we don't need to argue with people. We can just explain how it works for them. And then, you know, try as best as we can to do it from a place of, I'm a libertarian, not because I hate what's happening, but because I love the people that I want to get better. I want to make this situation better for everyone and focus on that positive change. Because a lot of everyday people, they've got enough negativity in their lives. And if you show up and tell them how terrible everything is, they're not going to want to hear it. But if you show up and tell them how we can have things better, then, you know, we can really get somewhere. And then I guess the last thing I want to say is, my website's coming out soon. It's going to be spikecohen.com. In the meantime, you can check me out on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok for the kids. But soon you'll be able to go to spikecohen.com. It'll have all my different stuff there, including my upcoming events. Check out my events calendar on my Facebook. That has all my upcoming things that I'm going to be at. If I'm in your area, come on out. I'd love to meet you. Everywhere I go, I try to do as much Q&A as possible, answer as many people's questions as I can. I go out places. I don't go out places to give speeches. My speeches are like 5-10 minutes long. I go out to meet people, talk to people, get people excited about liberty. So if I'm coming to your area, come hang out and love to meet you. And thank you for having me on your show, Tommy.
Oh, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you for coming on, and I hope to have you on again.
I'd love it, man. Thank you.
All right, Bubba. Well, you have a good one.
If you're gonna play scam, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedom. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names, on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Don't feed them cause we don't even need them. We'll never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them cause we don't even need them. We'll never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedom.